January 1st, 1981. St. Paul, Minnesota is blanketed in snow. Fresh flakes drift silently onto empty streets as New Year's revelers call it a night. Inside the police station, officers sip coffee, counting down the hours of an uneventful shift until 3 a.m. The switchboard rings, breaking the silence. An officer answers, frowning as he listens. The caller's voice, a man, sounds strained, high-pitched, almost trembling, distressed, almost crying. "This is an emergency," the man says. "Please send a squad to Pierce Butler Road, Malberg Manufacturing Company, and send an ambulance. There's a girl hurt there." The officer asks questions, trying to piece together the situation. "What happened? Where is she?" "She's on the ground by the railroad tracks at the entrance," the man replies, his voice growing more frantic. "Hurry! What's the address?" the officer presses. "I don't know." "Who are you?" Silence. Squad cars rush to Pierce Butler Road. What they find there shakes even the most hardened officers. A naked woman lies motionless in a snowbank, her body battered, her head and neck brutally injured. The wounds are so severe that parts of her brain are exposed. One officer kneels beside her, checking for a pulse, bracing for the worst. Relief washes over him. She's alive, barely, but the man who made the call is gone. Who is he? A mysterious Good Samaritan or something more sinister? It will take 16 years before police uncover his identity, revealed in a shocking deathbed confession. By then, the world will know him as someone entirely different, the weepy-voiced killer. Welcome to Veil, where we uncover the chilling stories hidden beneath the surface. This is the story of Paul Michael Stefani, a man whose voice pleaded for help, yet left a trail of bloodshed in his wake. The early hours of the new year drag on in St. Paul. Paramedics lift the woman from the snowbank, rushing her to the hospital, while detectives scour the scene for answers. Who is she? Why was she attacked? And where is the man who called it in? They find her clothes nearby, scattered across the snow. In the pocket of her jeans, they discover her ID. Her name is Karen Potak, a 20-year-old college student. A call to her family reveals she had been out celebrating New Year's Eve with her sisters. At some point, Karen decided to walk home alone. That decision almost cost her life. Karen's injuries are severe, her attack frenzied. Buttons from her blouse are found scattered 60 feet from her body. But there's little evidence to work with. The man who called remains the only witness, and he hasn't come forward. Against the odds, Karen survives. Slowly, she regains consciousness, but her memory is fractured. She remembers nothing about the attack or the person responsible. With no leads, the case goes cold. For now. 5 months later, it will snap back into focus, and when it does, the police will face a terrifying realization. They might have a serial killer in their midst. June 3rd, 1981. Summer is in the air, and St. Paul is alive with activity. On the outskirts of town, a group of teenagers head to a field near an unfinished stretch of highway. One of them brings a football, and they play catch, tossing high arcs under the warm sun. They spread out, their laughter carried on the breeze, until a bad throw sends the ball bouncing into the underbrush. One boy jogs over, peering into the long grass, but it's not the football he finds. It's a flash of bright red. The boy steps closer, the flash of red catching his eye. Curiosity drives him forward, but what he finds stops him cold. A young woman's body lies face down in the grass, lifeless. Panicked, the boys race to call the police. Soon, the quiet field is crawling with officers, their flashlights sweeping through the undergrowth. But the scene offers little to explain who she is or what happened to her. The body is moved to the medical examiner's office. The autopsy reveals a horrific truth: 61 stab wounds. The weapon? An ice pick. A choice so unusual it will become a vital clue in the days ahead. During the examination, detectives notice something pressed against the woman's skin: a locker key. With no other leads, the key becomes their best hope of identifying her. They trace it to the Greyhound bus depot. Inside the locker, they find 2 bags. Among the clothes and books is an ID. Her name was Kimberly Compton. She was only 18 years old. Kimberly had just arrived in St. Paul earlier that day. leaving her small Wisconsin hometown to search for a job. Her family describes her as trusting, friendly, and full of hope. But her first day in the city became her last. 2 days later, the switchboard at the St. Paul Police Department buzzes again. The voice on the other end is unmistakable, high-pitched, trembling, and distressed. "Will you find me? I can't stop myself," the man cries. "I keep killing somebody. I don't know why I had to stab her." At first, officers are skeptical. Prank calls are common, even about serious cases. But then the man adds a chilling detail. "I just stabbed someone with an ice pick." This detail hasn't been released to the public. Kimberly Compton's murder weapon was an ice pick. The realization hits. This is no prank. They're speaking to Kimberly's killer. Police scramble to trace the call, but the man hangs up before they can lock on to his location. Then, 2 hours later, the phone rings again. "Don't talk, just listen," the man pleads, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm sorry for what I did to Compton. I couldn't help it." Any remaining doubt vanishes. This man killed Kimberly Compton. But then his tone shifts, almost casual. "I'll try not to kill anybody else," he says. The line clicks dead. This time, though, the man made a mistake. He stayed on long enough for the call to be traced. It came from a phone booth at the bus depot. Officers race through the city, sirens piercing the night. When they arrive, the booth is empty. Interviews with witnesses yield nothing. No one remembers seeing anyone suspicious. Efforts to dust for prints fail. Too many people have used the booth to isolate any one set. Even surveillance over the next few days comes up empty. But police still have one lead: the phone calls. Why would a killer confess? Does he genuinely want to be stopped? Or is this part of a twisted game? The voice is unforgettable. Investigators start combing through old recordings of calls linked to unsolved cases, searching for any connection. They don't have to search long. One call stands out: a weepy-voiced man directing police to help Karen Potak, the young woman found beaten in the snow on New Year's Day. When the recordings are compared, there's little doubt. It's the same voice. The implications are chilling. Despite his apparent guilt, this man may be escalating. Kimberly Compton and Karen Potak could just be the beginning. Detectives pour every resource into the case, analyzing calls, searching for clues, and trying to find any connection between the victims. Weeks pass with no breakthrough. Desperate, police turn to the media. They release segments of the killer's calls to the public. The recordings of the weepy-voiced killer are broadcast on local news stations. The eerie, high-pitched voice sending shivers through viewers across St. Paul. Police hope someone, somewhere, might recognize him. The public dubs him the weepy-voiced killer, a name born from the haunting wails in his calls. The response is overwhelming. Over 150 tips pour in, each claiming to know the man behind the voice. Investigators pursue them all, one by one, only to hit dead end after dead end. For months, the case stagnates. Then, in August, a domestic abuse call changes everything. Officers are dispatched to a small house in St. Paul after a report of a man holding his family hostage. His name is Alan Lopez. Armed with a loaded gun, he's barricaded himself inside, keeping police at bay. Unable to force entry without risking lives, officers call the house phone, attempting to talk Lopez down. What happens next shocks everyone. Lopez confesses to being Kimberly Compton's killer. The revelation sparks immediate action. Police storm the house and arrest Lopez, but it's too late. Tragically, he has already killed his family. In custody, Lopez continues to insist he murdered Kimberly. Yet detectives need proof. They begin piecing together his movements on the day of her death. If he was near the scene of the crime, they might finally have their man. But Lopez's claim begins to crumble. His timeline doesn't add up. Detectives turn to the strongest evidence they have: the chilling phone calls from the weepy-voiced killer. They compare Lopez's voice to the recordings. The result? The voices couldn't be more different. Despite his frantic confessions, there's no evidence linking Lopez to Kimberly's murder. So why would he claim responsibility? As investigators dig deeper, they uncover Lopez's history of violence and mental health struggles. But before they can find answers, Lopez takes his own life in prison. For months, silence follows. No more weepy-voiced calls, no new leads. For a while, police wonder, could Lopez have been the killer after all? Then, on August 6, 1982, a discovery proves them wrong. A paperboy cycles his usual route along the Mississippi River, the morning sun glinting through the trees. Near the path, something catches his eye, a pair of glasses lying in the grass. He stops, scanning the area, and spots what looks like a mannequin near the tree line. Curious, he approaches, leaning in to touch its foot. Horror strikes. It's not a mannequin, it's a woman's body. The boy stumbles back in shock and pedals away to find help. When detectives arrive, they're met with a scene of unimaginable brutality. The victim has been stabbed 106 times. Drag marks in the dirt suggest she was moved post-mortem, implying her killer was calm and calculating, likely no stranger to murder. The investigation yields little. There are no identifying clues at the scene, and the autopsy provides no significant leads. Detectives are left grasping at a chilling thought. If the killer is this meticulous, they could strike again at any time. 2 days later, on August 8th, the Minneapolis PD receives a call. The voice on the line is unmistakable, high-pitched, trembling, and filled with remorse. "I'm sorry I killed that girl," the man sobs. "Kimberly Compton was the first one. Over in St. Paul. I'll never make it to heaven." This call reveals two horrifying truths. First, Alan Lopez was not the weepy-voiced killer. Second, the woman found near the Mississippi River is connected to the attacks on Kimberly Compton and Karen Potak. The weepy-voiced killer is still out there, and now he's claimed his third victim. Minneapolis police notify their counterparts in St. Paul. The killer has struck again. The FBI steps in, tasked with profiling this elusive murderer. But they don't have much to go on. The killer targets women with brutal precision, yet seems consumed by a need to confess. Agents suggest the calls aren't about guilt, they're about control. They don't believe the killer wants to be caught. Instead, he thrives on the attention, playing a twisted game of cat and mouse. And if police can't catch him soon, the question looms, when and where will he strike next? Not long after the discovery of the latest victim, a mailman near the Greyhound bus terminal in St. Paul stumbles upon something unusual, a purse abandoned in a mailbox. Out of curiosity, he opens it and finds an ID. The name on it reads Barbara Simons, a 41-year-old nurse from South Minneapolis. Thinking it's lost property, the mailman turns it in to the police. Unknowingly, he's just handed detectives the name of the weepy-voiced killer's latest victim. Investigators track down Barbara's friends and family, piecing together her final hours. She was last seen at the Hexagon Bar in southeast Minneapolis, enjoying a night out. A bartender recalls her drinking with a man, a muscular white male in his 40s, about 6 feet tall with a dark mustache. Could this man be the killer? Detectives dive into local records, combing through mugshots of men with a history of violent assault. They narrow a list of 147 suspects down to 8, based on the bartender's description. When shown the photos, the bartender points to one man without hesitation. His name is Paul Michael Stefani. Stefani isn't a stranger to law enforcement. In 1976, he was convicted of assault. A deeper dive into his history uncovers an unsettling connection. He once worked as a janitor at Malberg Manufacturing Company in St. Paul. It's the same place where Karen Potak was found unconscious on New Year's Day, 1981. The pieces are falling into place. Stefani's past, his ties to the victims, and the bartender's confirmation make him the prime suspect in the weepy-voiced killer case. With Stefani under surveillance, police watch his every move, determined to keep him from striking again. For 2 weeks, they shadow him closely. Then, on August 21st, 1982, Stefani leaves his apartment and gets into his car. Detectives tail him through winding streets, highways, and residential neighborhoods, never letting him out of their sight. But then, disaster. In the blink of an eye, Stefani is gone. Whether he spotted the surveillance or simply slipped away, police lose him in the chaos of city traffic. Panic sets in. Officers alert other departments and scour the area, but Stefani has vanished. Hours later, a call comes into the St. Paul Police Department. A woman has been attacked. Responders rush to the scene, finding 21-year-old Denise Williams in critical condition. She's alive, but barely. At the hospital, Denise regains consciousness and describes the horrifying events. She had been hitchhiking to a party when a man picked her up and drove her to a warehouse in northeast Minneapolis. There, he attacked her, stabbing her repeatedly with a screwdriver. Desperate to survive, Denise fought back. In the dark, her hands fumbled for a weapon and found an empty Coke bottle. She smashed it across her attacker's face, stunning him just long enough to escape. But her attacker wasn't ready to give up. He followed her, intent on finishing the job. Thankfully, a passerby intervened and called for help, putting an end to the assault. Days later, Denise revises her initial account. She wasn't hitchhiking to a party. She's a sex worker, and her attacker was a customer. Meanwhile, the surveillance team monitoring Stefani's apartment returns to find chaos. An ambulance is parked outside, red and blue lights casting eerie flashes across the scene. Confused, the team checks with dispatch and learns that Stefani himself had called the police earlier. "I'm all cut up," he said. "I got beat up and I'm bleeding." Paramedics find Stefani inside, blood streaming from cuts on his arm, face, and head. But police aren't sympathetic. His injuries sound suspiciously like the wounds Denise described inflicting on her attacker with a glass bottle. Detectives rush to the hospital to show Denise a set of mugshots. Despite her exhaustion and pain, she doesn't hesitate. "That's him," she says, pointing to Stefani's photo. It's the break police have been waiting for. Later that evening, Stefani is brought to the St. Paul Police Department for questioning. Across from him sits Detective Don Brown, who has spent years chasing the weepy-voiced killer. Stefani's face is bandaged, his nose cut, and his cheek covered with gauze. He claims he was the victim of a home robbery, attacked by thieves who broke into his apartment. Detective Brown listens carefully, searching for any sign of the distinctive high-pitched voice from the killer's calls. But Stefani speaks calmly and evenly, his tone controlled. Brown decides to try a different approach. He opens a folder containing photos of the victims, Karen Potak, Kimberly Compton, Barbara Simons, and lays them out on the table. The reaction is immediate. Stefani leaps to his feet, pushing away from the table. "You're not going to pin those on me," he wails. But it's not just his words, it's his voice. The calm, low tone is gone, replaced by the unmistakable high-pitched, trembling wail of the weepy-voiced killer. For Detective Brown, it's the final piece of the puzzle. Stefani and the weepy-voiced killer are one and the same. With Sonny in custody, the district attorney moves quickly to charge him. Denise Williams' testimony, paired with the bartender's confirmation that Stefani was with Barbara Simons the night she died, strengthens their case. But prosecutors want to do more. They hope to tie Stefani to the attacks on Karen Potak in 1980 and Kimberly Compton in 1981. There's one problem: evidence. Apart from the weepy-voiced phone calls, there's nothing concrete to link Stefani to the earlier crimes. To ensure a conviction, the DA decides to focus on the attack on Denise Williams and the murder of Barbara Simons. As they prepare for trial, investigators dig into Stefani's life, uncovering a past marked by turmoil. Born the youngest of 10 children, Stefani grew up near Austin, Minnesota. His parents divorced when he was young, and his mother remarried in 1947. His stepfather, a staunch Catholic with a violent temper, ruled the household with an iron fist. Punishments often turned physical. When Stefani misbehaved, he was smacked on the head or thrown downstairs, leaving him bruised and battered. Outwardly, the family appeared devout and orderly, and no one intervened. By the mid-1960s, Stefani moved to St. Paul, taking jobs as a janitor and shipping clerk. He met and married Beverly Leiter, and the couple had a daughter shortly after. For a while, Stefani's life seemed ordinary, but by the late 1970s, things began to unravel. His marriage fell apart not long after his daughter's birth. After his divorce, Paul Michael Stefani's life unraveled. His wife left, taking their daughter, and he never saw them again. Romantic relationships were fleeting. One girlfriend left him to return to Syria for an arranged marriage. Rejection followed him everywhere. For Detective Don Brown, this pattern of abandonment and loss was more than coincidence. It was a spark that may have ignited Stefani's violent rage against women. Brown also sees another connection: Stefani's strict Catholic upbringing. The belief in confessing sins for absolution aligns eerily with the weepy-voiced killer's desperate calls. Stefani seemed to think that confessing his crimes would wipe the slate clean. It took 18 months for the Minneapolis District Attorney, Tom Foley, to prepare the case. By February 1984, Stefani was ready to stand trial for murder. The prosecution's case centered on the infamous phone calls. To link the voice on the recordings to Stefani, Foley initially called a voice expert, but the judge dismissed the testimony, deeming it inadmissible. Foley adapted. If an expert couldn't testify, he'd use someone who knew Stefani intimately, his sister, Judith. In court, Judith sat in the witness box. As the chilling 911 calls played, tearfully, she confirmed the voice was her brother's. The prosecution also relied on eyewitness testimony. Denise Williams identified Stefani as her attacker, and the bartender confirmed seeing him with Barbara Simons the night she was killed. Despite the lack of physical evidence, the case was strong. On February 28, 1984, the jury delivered their verdict, guilty on all counts. Stefani received 18 years for the attack on Denise Williams, and an additional 40 years for the murder of Barbara Simons. With Stefani locked away at Oak Park Heights Prison, his case faded from public attention. But the families of his victims couldn't move on. Karen Potak, his presumed first victim, continued to suffer from the injury she sustained on New Year's Day in 1980. Kimberly Compton's family was left without closure, unable to prove that Stefani was her murderer. For years, these wounds remained open until 1997. 13 years after Stefani's conviction, a guard at Oak Park Heights Prison reached out to Lieutenant Joe Corcoran, who had worked the case in the 1980s. Stefani, now 53, wanted to talk. He had a favor to ask in exchange for something invaluable, a confession. The request was simple. Stefani wanted photos of his mother's headstone to keep in his cell. Corcoran agreed. Once Stefani had the pictures, he kept his promise. Sitting across from the lieutenant in a small prison cell, Stefani revealed he had terminal cancer. He had less than a year to live. Driven by his Catholic faith, Stefani was ready to confess. In a frail voice, he admitted to everything the police had suspected: the attack on Karen Potak, the murder of Kimberly Compton. Both were his crimes. But Stefani wasn't finished. In a shocking twist, he confessed to a third murder, a crime no one had connected to him. Stefani's trademark had always been the emotional phone calls, but after this murder, there was no call. Without his confession, the link might never have been made. There was a complication, however. Stefani's memory was failing. He couldn't recall his victim's name or address, but he remembered drowning her in a bathtub. And he wasn't done. There was more he wanted to share. Stefani provides detectives with one final clue: the layout of his victim's house. He describes it in detail to Lieutenant Corcoran, even recalling how he pushed her purse into a mailbox, just as he had with Barbara Simons. But after this, he shuts down. Stefani believes he's fulfilled his end of the deal, and the conversation is over. As Corcoran leaves Oak Park Heights Prison, a sense of dread settles over him. Identifying Stefani's third victim will be a daunting task. Detectives sift through cold cases, searching for one that fits Stefani's confession. Days later, they find it. In July 1982, a month before Denise Williams' attack, Kathleen Greening, a 31-year-old schoolteacher, was found dead in her home. Her death was initially ruled undetermined, with her husband as the prime suspect, though he denied any involvement. Corcoran reviews Stefani's description of the house and his actions with the purse. The details match. The final piece of evidence is found in Kathleen's phone book. As detectives scan the pages, they freeze. There it is, an entry for Paul S., along with Stefani's phone number. His name had been in plain sight all along. Detectives don't know how Stefani and Kathleen met, or what their relationship was, but his confession leaves no doubt. Paul Michael Stefani killed Kathleen Greening. News of the confession reignites media interest in the case. Reporters scramble to interview Stefani, eager for insight into his motives. Caroline Lowe, a journalist at WCCO, secures an exclusive interview with the infamous killer in the summer of 1997. Sitting in the prison's waiting room, Lowe feels a mix of nerves and anticipation. Meeting a man responsible for such brutal crimes is an opportunity few journalists get, but it's a heavy responsibility. The sound of footsteps breaks her thoughts. Stefani enters the room, escorted by guards. His once dark hair has turned silver, but he remains a large, imposing figure. It's easy to see how he overpowered his victims. Stefani greets Lowe with casual small talk, his demeanor eerily disarming. He speaks as though they're old friends, discussing the weather. When asked about his murders, Stefani's answers are vague. He describes sitting in his car at night, consumed by the chaotic thoughts in his head, sometimes hearing voices telling him to kill. As he recounts Kathleen Greening's murder, a chilling smile crosses his face. It's as if he's reliving a fond memory. Lowe also brings up Stefani's Catholic faith, a theory detectives had long considered. He admits that after one of his murders, he went to church and wept. In a higher-pitched tone, reminiscent of his weepy-voiced calls, Stefani reflects on his failing health and limited time left. All he wants, he claims, is to confess and make what little amends he can before he dies. When Lowe leaves the prison hours later, she's left with a mix of emotions. The interview doesn't provide all the answers the victims' families need, but it offers a semblance of closure. Finally, there's no doubt about Stefani's guilt in the murders of Karen Potak, Kimberly Compton, and Kathleen Greening. A year later, on June 12, 1998, Paul Michael Stefani dies in the infirmary at Oak Park Heights. His death marks the end of a long and harrowing journey for the families of his victims, a journey prolonged by years of silence, legal battles, and his chilling deathbed confession. While questions about his motives and the full extent of his crimes may never be fully answered, two truths remain clear. Paul Michael Stefani was the weepy-voiced killer, and his haunting, high-pitched wails will never echo through Minneapolis again. Thanks for watching Veil. If you're into stories of murder, espionage, and heist, hit like, smash subscribe, and ring the bell. There's always more to uncover.